My wife cheated with her millionaire ex-boss after 25 years. My kids blamed me and ignored me for 8 years. But when the affair partner went broke and they came begging for $50,000, my revenge left them speechless. I'm 50 years old. I run my own tech consulting company. And after everything that happened, after 8 years of silence, after rebuilding my life from scratch, I need to tell this story because a few weeks ago my kids showed up at my door like nothing had happened, like they hadn't ripped my heart out and thrown it in the trash. I guess I should start at the beginning, when I still believed I had a family, when I still thought 25 years of marriage meant something. I married Christine when I was 25 and she was 23. You know, we were young but not stupid, or so I thought. She worked as an office manager at a landscaping company. I was starting out in it, and things were good, like really good. We had Ryan when I was 23, and then Hannah 2 years later. Christine stopped working when Ryan was born, and I never had a problem with that. Honestly, I always thought raising kids was the most important job in the world. I worked hard, very hard, doing overtime, extra projects, whatever it took. So, my family had everything they needed. We weren't rich, but we weren't lacking anything either. You know what I mean? The kids went to good schools. We had a decent house in a quiet neighborhood, vacations every year, the typical middle-class family stuff. The years went by and, honestly, I thought we were happy. Ryan studied business administration. Hannah got into marketing. Both graduated, got jobs, met their partners. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. Christine and I had our routine after 25 years together. Obviously, it wasn't the same crazy passion as when we were 20. But we were fine. Or so I thought. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. All those signs I ignored because I blindly trusted her. She started getting more dressed up, like she'd go out to run errands and come back with perfect hair and fresh makeup. She bought new clothes without telling me anything. She started going to the gym 4 times a week, when before she wasn't interested in exercise at all. I thought, well, she wants to feel good about herself. What's wrong with that? What an idiot I was. Everything exploded like 9 years ago. In March, I think, or maybe it was April. I'm not exactly sure, but I do remember perfectly that it was a Friday afternoon. I got home early from work because I'd finished a big project and my boss told me to go home to take the rest of the day off. Christine wasn't home, which was weird because normally on Fridays we'd go grocery shopping together or watch a movie. But whatever. I figured she'd gone out with a friend. I sent her a message asking where she was, and she responded with something vague like, doing some things. I'll be home in a couple hours. Something in my chest tightened. I don't know why, but I decided to track her phone. Yes, we had one of those family apps where you can see everyone's location, supposedly for emergencies. I saw her at a coffee shop on the other side of town, an upscale place we never went to, because it was too expensive for our usual budget. I got in the car and drove there. My heart was beating like crazy, and I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that surely there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. I got to the coffee shop and saw her through the window, sitting at a table in the back with a guy I recognized immediately, even though I'd never seen him in person. Alexander, the CEO of the landscaping company where Christine had worked years ago. I'd seen him in photos that Christine had saved from company events, Christmas parties, and stuff like that. The guy was like 55 years old, perfectly styled gray hair, a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and he was sitting too close to my wife, touching her hand while she laughed at something he'd said. I stood there on the street like an idiot, staring through the glass, unable to process what I was seeing. I waited for them to leave, followed at a safe distance in my 2015 Honda Civic while they got into his black, gleaming Mercedes, and I watched them enter a hotel. A hotel. My wife of 25 years was entering a hotel with another man on a Friday afternoon. I didn't go in after them. I didn't make a scene. I just sat in the parking lot for 2 hours until I saw Christine come out alone, fixing her hair and checking her phone. I drove home before her, threw some clothes in a suitcase, and when she arrived like nothing had happened, with that fake smile asking me how my day had been, I simply said, I know about Alexander. Her face went white, literally white, and for a second I thought she was going to deny it, but instead she just said, how did you find out? She didn't even try to lie, didn't even fake surprise or guilt. I asked her how long it had been going on and she told me a year. A whole year of lies and deception, And when I asked her why, you know what she said? She said Alexander made her feel special, that he took her to nice places, that he treated her like a queen, that, with me, everything was routine and boring. I laughed. Honestly, I laughed because I couldn't believe it. After 25 years of working to give her a good life, after sacrificing so many things, after being a faithful and dedicated husband, I was the boring one, and the other guy who took her to cheap hotels was the Prince Charming. I told her I was going to divorce her, and she shrugged. Literally shrugged like I was telling her I was going to buy milk. There were no tears, no pleading, no please forgive me, just a do what you have to do. I left that night to a friend's house, and the next day I hired a lawyer. The divorce was relatively quick because she didn't fight anything. I think she was so convinced Alexander was going to take care of her that she didn't care what happened to me. The house sold, we divided everything more or less equitably, and in 6 months we were officially divorced. But the worst part, the absolutely worst part, wasn't the divorce itself, but what happened. With Ryan and Hannah, I told my kids everything a week after discovering the affair. I thought I had to be honest with them, that they deserved to know the truth about why their family was falling apart. Ryan was 27 at that time, Hannah 25, both adults who could understand the situation. I met them at a neutral restaurant, like a quiet diner where we used to go when they were kids, and I explained everything. I told them their mother had cheated on me for a year with her ex-boss, but that I had tried to keep the family together, but I couldn't stay in a marriage without respect or honesty. I thought they'd support me, or at least understand my position, but what happened was completely different. Ryan looked at me like I was the guilty one, like I had done something wrong, and said, "Mom told us you've been cold and distant with her for years, that you never listened to her, that everything is work and more work with you." Hannah nodded and added, "Dad, maybe if you'd paid more attention to Mom, this wouldn't have happened." I sat there, mouth open, unable to process that my own children were blaming me for their mother cheating on me. I tried to explain to them, I tried to reason with them, but every time I spoke, they interrupted me with some version of the story Christine had told them. A story where I was the negligent villain, and she was the misunderstood victim, who was just looking for a little attention and affection. I said to them, "She was literally in a hotel with another man. How can you justify that?" And Ryan responded, "People make mistakes when they're desperate, Dad. Mistakes." He called a year of deliberate infidelity a mistake. I left that restaurant feeling more betrayed by my children than by my wife, because I expected Christine to lie to me and hurt me, but I never thought Ryan and Hannah would take her side without even considering my version of events. I called them several times during the following weeks, trying to maintain some kind of relationship, but the conversations were tense and cold, and eventually they stopped answering my calls as frequently. 8 months after the divorce, Hannah called me, and for a moment I thought maybe she had reflected, that maybe she wanted to reconnect with me for real. But no. She told me she'd gotten engaged to her boyfriend of 3 years, a guy named David who I knew and liked, and they were planning the wedding for the next year. I told her I was very happy for her, that I was glad she'd found someone, and then came the blow. She said, "Dad, David and I have been thinking a lot about this, and we've decided we don't want you to come to the wedding." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I asked her why, and she explained they didn't want drama or tension on their special day, that Mom was going to be there with Alexander, and my presence would make everything uncomfortable. I said, "Hannah, I'm your father. I was there when you took your first steps, when you learned to ride a bike, when you graduated from college, and you're going to exclude me from your wedding because your mother doesn't want me there?" And you know what she said? She said, "Alexander is going to walk me down the aisle. He's been more present in my life lately than you have." Alexander, a guy my daughter had known for less than a year, was going to replace me in one of the most important moments of her life. I hung up the phone and cried. I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child. I cried for everything I had lost, for the family I thought I had that turned out to be a lie. 3 months later, Ryan called me with similar news. He was also getting married and I wasn't invited either. Same excuse about avoiding drama and tension. My 2 children had erased me from their lives because it was easier to keep Mom happy than to acknowledge that I had also been hurt, that I was also a victim in this whole situation. Over the following months, I tried to contact them a few more times, but eventually I stopped trying because I was tired of begging for a little attention from people who clearly didn't want me in their lives. They got married, had their perfect weddings without me, and I found out through photos someone shared on social media where I saw Alexander posing proudly with my children as if he were their father. 8 years passed. 8 complete years without barely speaking to Ryan or Hannah. Beyond generic birthday or Christmas messages that I sent, and they responded with a terse, thanks, or happy birthday too. During that time, I dedicated myself completely to my work. I became a machine for producing code and fixing tech problems. I worked 12, 14 hours a day because it was better to be busy than to be alone at home thinking about everything I had lost. It was my friend Edward, a guy I met on a work project like 7 years ago, who convinced me to leave my corporate job and start our own tech consulting company. At first, I was scared, honestly, because I was already 44, and starting a business from scratch sounded risky. But Edward was persuasive, and I had nothing to lose. So we said, what the hell, and did it. We started small, just the two of us working from his garage converted into an office, taking any project we could get, from installing security systems to developing custom software for small businesses. The thing is, we turned out to be good, very good, and in 2 years we had a real office with 5 employees and a client list that kept growing. Money started flowing in a way I'd never experienced in my life, like really well, and suddenly I had this successful company that was worth quite a bit more than I ever earned working for others. I met Margaret at a networking event like 5 years ago. She was a widow. Her husband had died in a car accident 3 years before, and she had a little girl who was 2 years old. It wasn't love at first sight or anything like that, but we started talking, going out, and slowly, I realized that for the first time in years I didn't feel completely alone. Margaret understood me. She had also lost her family in a certain way, and she didn't judge me for my past or for my kids who wouldn't talk to me. We got married 3 years ago in a small, quiet ceremony, just close friends and her family, and last year we had Isabella, a beautiful girl who gives me a reason to smile every day. I thought I had closed that chapter of my life, that Ryan and Hannah were part of my past, and my future was with Margaret and Isabella. But then, like 3 weeks ago, my doorbell rang on a Saturday afternoon. Margaret had taken Isabella to the park, and I was alone working on my laptop. And when I opened the door, there they were, Ryan and Hannah, standing on my porch like 8 years of silence hadn't passed. Ryan was 35 now. Hannah, 33. And they both looked tired, like really exhausted, with dark circles under their eyes and clothes that didn't look as new as before. They said, "Hi, Dad, can we talk?" And I stood, there not knowing what to say because part of me wanted to hug them and another part wanted to slam the door in their faces. I let them in, offered them something to drink, and we sat in the living room while an uncomfortable silence filled the space. Ryan spoke first, said things had changed a lot in recent years, that he and Hannah had had time to reflect and realized maybe they'd been unfair to me. It sounded hopeful until Hannah added, "Dad, we need your help." There it was, the real reason for their visit. They explained that Alexander, the wonderful Alexander who had replaced me in their lives, had had problems with his landscaping business, that the economy had hit his industry hard, and he'd basically gone bankrupt 2 years ago. Christine, who had been living with him in his fancy house enjoying his luxurious lifestyle, suddenly found herself with a bankrupt man who couldn't support her like before. Alexander left her, literally kicked her out of his house, and Christine had to move to a small apartment and get a part-time job at a store because she had no savings or anything. Ryan and Hannah, who had also enjoyed Alexander's generosity for years, helping them with down payments for their houses and expensive gifts for their kids, were now struggling financially because their own jobs weren't enough to maintain the lifestyle they'd become accustomed to. They told me Hannah had 2 kids now, 6 and 4 years old, that Ryan had 3 kids, 7, 5, and 2 years old, and they needed help with things like daycare, mortgages, medical expenses. They looked at me like I was their salvation, like I should be grateful they were finally including me in their lives again. I asked them, "Why now? Why, after 8 years of ignoring me, do you show up right when you have financial problems?" Hannah tried to say it wasn't just about money, that they'd really been thinking about me and wanted me to meet their kids, that they wanted to rebuild our relationship. I said, I had 8 Years to meet my grandchildren, and you kept me on the sidelines, and now that you need money, suddenly I'm important? Ryan got defensive. Said I was being unfair. That they were young when the divorce happened and they'd made mistakes, that I couldn't hold a grudge forever. I asked them to leave. Told them I needed time to process all this, but 2 days later they showed up at my office. Without warning, interrupting an important meeting with a client. My assistant tried to stop them, but they just barged in like they had a right to be there, with Hannah carrying her youngest son and Ryan with photos of his kids on his phone, trying to use the children as an emotional weapon. I asked my client to excuse me for a moment and took Ryan and Hannah to the hallway, where I told them, "You can't just show up at my work like this. This is completely inappropriate." Ryan shouted, "You're our father. You should want to help us. You should want to meet your grandchildren." I responded, "I was your father for 25 years, and you decided I wasn't good enough. You can't just come back when it's convenient for you." Hannah started crying, saying I was cruel, that she never thought I could be so cold with them, and I felt that old rage coming back, that feeling of being manipulated again. I kicked them out of my office and asked security not to let them in again, without a prior appointment. That night, I received a long email from Hannah, supposedly an apology for everything that had happened, but at the end of the message there was a business proposal asking me to invest $50,000 in an idea Ryan had for a startup. Something about a delivery app or whatever. It wasn't even a real apology. It was another request for money disguised as reconciliation. Ryan sent me a similar message a day later. Basically the same text copied and pasted with some words changed, as if they thought I was so stupid I wouldn't realize they'd coordinated everything. I responded to both with a short, direct message. Told them I wasn't going to give them money, that I wasn't going to invest in their ideas, that if they wanted to have a relationship with me, it would have to be genuine and without a financial agenda. But that honestly, I was no longer interested in trying after how they'd treated me. I blocked their numbers, blocked their emails, blocked their social media profiles, basically cut them completely out of my life. Margaret asked me if I was sure it was the right thing to do, if I wouldn't regret it later, and I told her I'd spent 8 years waiting for them to realize the damage they'd done to me. 8 years being the rejected father who still sent birthday and Christmas messages, hoping someday they'd respond with something more than monosyllables. I wasn't going to beg for their attention anymore. I wasn't going to be their plan B when things got tough, and I definitely wasn't going to be their ATM now that Alexander could no longer fulfill that role. I thought that would be the end. That they'd just go on with their lives and I with mine. But a week ago, something happened I didn't expect. Christine showed up at my door, alone, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. She was 56 now, looked tired and worn out in a way that surprised me because she'd always been vain about her appearance. She said, "Benjamin, can we talk?" And I stood there looking at her. This woman who had been my wife for 25 years, who had destroyed our marriage and our family, standing on my porch with tears in her eyes. I let her in because Margaret wasn't there and because, honestly, I was curious what she could want after almost 9 years. She sat on the same couch where Ryan and Hannah had been a few weeks earlier and told me, "Alexander left me. I'm living in a tiny apartment. I work in retail, earning minimum wage, and I realized I made the worst mistake of my life when I left you." She started crying, for real, that ugly, desperate crying, saying everything Alexander had promised her was a lie, that he only wanted her when he had money and success, that he'd thrown her out like trash when his business went down. She told me Ryan and Hannah barely spoke to her now because they blamed her for ruining the relationship they had with Alexander, that her own children resented her because they could no longer enjoy the luxuries Alexander gave them. She said, "I caused all this. I destroyed our family for a man who wasn't worth anything, and now I'm alone and have no one." She asked me for forgiveness, told me if she could turn back time, she'd do it differently, that I was always a good man, and she was a fool for not valuing it. For a second, just a second, I felt sorry for her, because seeing her so destroyed was difficult even after everything that had happened. But then, I remembered that day, at the coffee shop, that moment at the hotel, the way she shrugged when I told her I was going to divorce her, the way she poisoned my children against me, and that pity evaporated. Completely. I told her. Christine, I don't know what you expect from me, but if you came here looking for me to rescue you or forgive you, you're about 9 years too late. She said she didn't expect anything, that she just wanted me to know she was sorry. But I could see in her eyes that she did expect something. Maybe for me to offer her money. Maybe for me to say we could be friends. I don't know. I said, I have a new life now. I have a wife who truly loves me. I have a little daughter who gives me joy every day. And honestly, I don't have room in my life anymore for the drama you, Ryan, and Hannah brought. She tried to say something more, but I stood up and walked to the door. I said, I hope you find the peace you need, but it's not going to be with me, and I ask that you don't show up here again. She got up slowly, looked at me one last time with those sad eyes, and left without saying anything more. I closed the door and stood there for a long time, waiting to feel something, guilt, sadness, regret, but all I felt was relief. Relief that I had finally closed that door, literally and figuratively, that I no longer had to carry the hope that someday my original family would accept me again. Margaret came home an hour later with Isabella, who ran toward me shouting "Daddy" in that high-pitched voice 2-year-olds have, and I picked her up while laughing at something silly. She was trying to tell me about the ducks she'd seen at the park. This is my family now. This little girl who sees me as her hero. This woman who chose me knowing my whole complicated history. And it's okay. More than okay, actually. It's enough.